Good afternoon, everyone. Welcome to the Heritage Center of Murfreesboro and Rutherford County for this book talk and just good discussion about Southern rock music with Bob Beatty. Bob holds the PhD in public history here from Middle Tennessee State University, and I was proud to be his major professor and dissertation director back in the day when we got that all done. Of course, Bob had a long career in the public humanities before he ever heard of MTSU, probably. Starting in the real excellent, if you've never been to it, when you go to Orlando, I know there's all these things to do, but they have an excellent county history museum. We could do with one as good as the one they have in Orlando. And Bob was with that. That's when I first saw some of his handiwork, way back in the day. And then Bob worked with the American Association of State and Local History in Nashville for several years on different projects. And then Bob came to me one day, and that's why we're here today. So Bob, tell me about that road that you took from Orange County, Florida to Murfreesboro, Tennessee, and the production of this study on the Allman Brothers Band.
Yeah, thank you for the intro. And this guy, for those of you who don't know, I don't know how many of you are Van West stans that are here. I stan Van West 100%, because without him, I wouldn't have been able to fulfill this dream, which was this. So when I left Orlando, I opened the history center that Van's talking about. It's in a 1927 neoclassical courthouse. Orlando and much of Florida doesn't have a super deep historic preservation aesthetic. There was a lot of tear it down, let's get started and rebuild. And this was a unique project for Orange County because they invested in it. And I saw what happened when the county government invested in the past in putting this, this home in the center of downtown in this building that is absolutely irreplaceable. And we'd already lost an 1892 courthouse. Literally, bricks started falling off the clock tower on people, and they had to tear it down. So, you sort of learn that aesthetic about, like buildings being important and local history being a really critical part. And so I took the job here at AASLH in 2007, and that was my really chance to try out all these things I had learned there nationally. I don't want to nerd out on AASLH, but it's a professional association of people like Van and his students and his staff and me working with museums, historical societies, what we call public history, I guess is the best way to say it. And so I worked there, and then honestly, what precipitated it was my mother passed away. And when you're in your 40s and if you lose a parent, this happens whenever you lose somebody dear to you, you start thinking about what were the things you wanted to do. And I had 3 goals left on a list that I had made in the late 90s. This was 2012. Get a PhD, write a book on the Allman Brothers, and learn to play slide guitar. Those were the 3 last things on this list. And so I came out to see you. I can't remember if we met. I think we met in here, and we were sitting there. Van, this is one of my most vivid memories. We're sitting there, and Van, in some ways was sussing me out. What is this project? And I had brought my thesis, which was on museums and community. Kind of a cool topic, but I was done with it. I didn't say that. I handed it to him, and he's looking at it, and I said, this is what I did for my master's thesis, but I really want to do something on the Allman Brothers. And seriously, his eyes lit up, and he leaned back and looked over at me, and I was like, okay, I think I have a place that I can do this. So from there, it was simply kind of following a course to navigate the university and really, so I got a PhD here at Middle Tennessee. I earned it at 47 years old. And I did it part-time because he let me, and I studied under him, and came out here once a week. In fact, I was thinking about it today, this drive I used to make once a week, there and back, for years. It took me 5.5 years, and I wrote a dissertation under Van West, and to explain that, I don't know if that was on one of your notes, but let me just say that to finish a PhD or to finish a master's, you have to write a culminating paper. We call it a thesis, or a PhD is a dissertation. I wrote what I felt like was a really good dissertation to turn into a book about Duane Allman and the Allman Brothers. And as Van is chuckling, I wrote, as I learned, there's no such thing as a perfect dissertation. The only thing perfect dissertation is what? It's a finished dissertation. And Van understood that in ways I did not understand at that point. But his goal was always, your goal, I should say, because I'm talking to the audience now, but your goal was always a book. You would never let me let go of that goal. So, I mean, that's what really, it was really getting that part done while I was dealing with classes and everything else. It did make me a much better historian. I don't make fun of this program or this university or any of my training here. It was important for me to get to where I was. So the next step, I guess, is really just how the book got turned into the publication.
Yeah, well, you know, the one thing that I thought you were going to go into, Bob, is when he sent me one draft of the dissertation, and I sent back the sort of pithy comment, well, you know, it's pretty good, but it's too much of a fanboy take.
Yeah, what your comment was, it was okay. So I was sending Van dissertation chapters. That's how we do this, right? You take it in chunks, and I sent this one chapter, and Van wrote me back, and it was see me, and I was like, oh shit, I'm screwed. And I get there, and he starts going through, and he goes, and this one's a real howler, and he reads it off to me, and it was not my quote. It was Paul Hornsby's quote, Duane's bandmate, in my defense. But what he was trying to tell me even at that moment was, and I've struggled with the fanboy line, and you know, I admit it right at the front. I say I am far from unbiased here because ultimately I'm a fan first. That's what I came into all of this as. So looking at this from an objective lens was a challenge for me. It was definitely a challenge.
But you got there.
I did.
Yeah,
I feel like I
got
did.
there. Yeah,
I feel
you
like
got
I did.
there. Now, and when we looked at these dissertations that they do, you know, they're big sprawling projects and they cover all types of topics because you have to get a committee of faculty members to approve it.
Yes.
So that means, of course, you have to have something in there for every member of that committee to approve, because if they don't see what they want in there, you're in trouble. So you had this big sprawling dissertation manuscript. Why did you end up deciding to focus it the way you did for the book?
So what the dissertation essentially was really my compendium of everything I learned about Duane Allman, probably. I mean, it's probably the best way. And it was organized by chapter. It made sense, but it was not something that you can just turn into a publisher and do. That was the biggest lesson I had to learn here, and anybody who goes through this was like, your dissertation is not my dissertation was not the rough draft of my book that I thought it was.
Right.
And I'm a seasoned writer, man. I've written a lot of books. I've written a lot of articles. I've written a lot of presentations. And 80% of the time, that first draft is done. And I'm just painting around the edges. And the dissertation wasn't even that way either.
No.
The book was, ultimately I looked at the dissertation, it was probably maybe 50% I kept as is. So the whole gist of the book, what turned out to be the book is this. Duane Allman sought to do a certain something in music that he stated that his bandmates did, more or less, play improvisational rock music in front of an audience at a high level. That's probably the easiest one to say. He needed certain elements to put that together. His bandmates. He needed record company support. He needed to build an audience. All of these things come together. But the biggest point is, how do we know if Duane was successful in what his goal was? And the reason we know that is because of the success of At Fillmore East. And in today's world, it's hard to imagine how important it was to have a gold record in 6 weeks with a band that hadn't sold but 100-something thousand units over 2.5 years and had spent 250, 300 days a year on the road. We don't even think about it. So I had to come to grips with like, what's a gold record? Why is it important? And so that was really where it came to. Like, how do we know what it was he wanted to do? It's not just because I like it, or Van likes it, or anybody else likes the music. It's because they said what they wanted to accomplish, and the primary sources actually say they accomplished that. Quotes from reviewers, people who were there, the fact that the record sold as well as it did, et cetera, et cetera. This is how we knew all of that. And frankly, it was surprising to me no one had written a book on At Fillmore East. Like, universally known as one of the greatest albums ever. So for me, it was like, dang, the greatest live albums, I should say. But it was like dropped in my lap once I decided to do it.
Yeah, so let's unpack that a little bit. So the book really focuses on the Fillmore East concerts, which were when?
March 12th and 13th, 1971.
How many of you were at Alumni Memorial Gym at Middle Tennessee State University about a month after those concerts for the Allman Brothers show?
Nice job. I didn't know you were there too.
Oh, yeah.
There's pictures.
Yeah. Well, my brother wrote for Sidelines then. I was still in high school, but he got me a pass. So I went as his press assistant.
I love it.
It's always been very interesting to some of us here in the Murfreesboro area, the acclaim of that album, because we heard not the same show, but we heard a lot of the same show that night here at Alumni Memorial Gym. And for you newcomers to MTSU, the Alumni Memorial Gym is that little building on Middle Tennessee Boulevard that you probably don't know what that is, except they have a swimming pool next to it. That's Alumni Gym. That existed before Murphy Center. So Murphy Center doesn't come online till 1972. And that would have been a much different sound in that building, because Alumni Gym holds 3,000 people or so. That was probably what was there. So, a real different experience.
Right.
Much like the Fillmore experience would have been.
Fixing to say that. And, in 1970 and 71, the Allman Brothers made their bones at colleges and universities.
Yep.
That's really where, and you'll see that. And it was all throughout the South and all the way up the East Coast. Not as much, yes, in the Midwest and down through the Great Plains area, but really big time in this area. They were a house band for, a lot of folks. And you mentioned the one thing everybody said about Idlewild South in the first album was it doesn't sound as good as them live.
No.
For all of y'all that had seen them live, everybody said the same thing. And then you get At Fillmore East, and it's like, yeah, that sounds like what I expected to be, and it did, and it was successful. That was the deal.
Well, then Fillmore East, though, that album, it is viewed as iconic, one of the great live albums of the time. Why is that one this great survivor of a period that in the music industry, for any band, they were putting out all types of live albums in the early 70s.
Right.
Why has that one been such a lasting one that when you listen to it today, it sounds just as fresh today, frankly, as it did 50 years ago?
I totally agree with you. And I wish I had a really good answer for why it endures. I think the one reason it endures is because what Duane and the original Allman Brothers Band were looking to do with music, they translated it to vinyl, to a record, and people react to that. The entire thing was so brilliantly conceived, from the idea to record the third record live, how they edited it in terms of what songs they included, because it's got 2 old songs on it, songs they'd already released before. Their decisions, I think their decisions to leave all of the song intros in, and I did write this in the book, I think it shows a personal, fun side to Duane Allman and to the band that comes through to audiences, and I think that's another reason why they stick with it. And I'm sure there's also a famous album becomes a famous album, and we all hand it off to the next generation. You got to listen to this, and that's probably a part of it too. It does endure, and it does sound timeless. I totally agree with you on that one, Van. It could have been recorded yesterday.
Well, from my perspective, Bob, it is where the album did achieve what Duane set out for the band to be, this Southern band who they were a cover band in many ways.
Very much so.
But then they would riff on those covers and turn them into uniquely their own creations.
Right.
And it's the musicianship of that album that is the enduring part.
Yeah. Yes. 100%. And I want to get to the originality, because that was another rub we had back before. Van, it was hard for me because he's teachers speak in code, right? They don't tell you exactly what they want you to do. So at one point I was talking a lot about Duane Allman in this era where he called me into his office about the Howler. But it was cover artist. You know, and it was what Van forced me to reconcile was from 1967 and 1968 when Duane Allman was in a band called the Hourglass in LA, trying to make it, and extremely frustrated. It sounds like Tom Jones psychedelia to me. It sounds like really bad blood, sweat, and tears. Duane was like, I have more. But Van kept saying he didn't offer more. He didn't do song arrangements. He was not a songwriter. He was just a really good guitar player. And he had to learn to unlock, to change the covers enough to make them their own. And that required a different group of people around him. Dickie, Barry, Butch, Jaimoe, Greg was already, you know, there. And that, you know, Statesboro Blues, their arrangement is very similar to Taj Mahal's version that they learned from. But Duane sounds like he's playing a harmonica on it, right? It just, you know, there's your musicianship. It just sounds, it's a brilliantly recorded album too, and I think that's another reason we listen to it so much. Tom Dowd, masterful job engineering that album, and that room sounded brilliant. Also another rest in peace, historic preservation loss, big one.
Well, now, Bob, you know, most in the audience don't remember these days, but some of you might. The quadraphonic sound era. So, of course, being all things music, I had invested in that series. I have a quadraphonic version of that album.
Wow.
And that is something to listen to at some point, because it just sort of recreates the sound of the whole experience very well. But that was where, you know, audiophiles, I guess is the word that you use, really got into the record as well because of that quadraphonic version of it. And I know that's a concept that some other time we'll explain to you, the quadraphonic revolution in music that happened in the early 70s.
You know, I don't know if any of you are Allman Brothers fans, but I bet I own about 8 different versions of At Fillmore East. Most Allman Brothers fans have multiple versions because of all the different remasters they do, and then they piece it back together and blah, 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 and it's an obsession. It's been fun.
Okay, well, talk some about the impact of the other musicians besides Duane, though, on the album and how you treat those individuals in the book.
Yeah, so probably the number one thing about Duane Allman that I've always admired, I like leaders, and I look to leaders, but I like leaders who understand they're a part of an ensemble, and a lot of times you can look toward musicians for that. Bands are like that. It's one reason I like to play in bands, is I like the push-pull with other people. It's a great dynamic. And it takes a little bit of the tension out of the world sometimes for me, an ability to speak as clearly as I want to in the moment or something like that. Duane had one bandmate his entire life, his brother Greg. In 1968, he and Greg split for the only time in their lives. Duane comes back and eventually settles in Muscle Shoals, and that's where he makes his name. He records Hey Jude with Wilson Pickett, basically gets to write his ticket. It's a massive hit. In spring 1969, fall 1968, Duane did the arrangement, Duane played a blistering solo, and he got to write his ticket. And by about March 1969, by March 1969, he had left Muscle Shoals with Jaimoe. Jaimoe is an African-American drummer. J. Johnny Johnson was what he was going by at the time, backed, among others, Otis Redding. He was one of Otis Redding's backing musicians. Jaimoe had gone to Muscle Shoals to link up with Duane, and they had a really great time playing, to such an extent that none of the Muscle Shoals guys would play with them when they would just jam. Barry Oakley, the bass player, who Duane had met in the summer of 1968, also started going from Jacksonville to Muscle Shoals to work on a solo project with Duane. Duane's trying to pull him away from his band, The Second Coming, with Dickie Betts. Dickie and Barry Oakley, Dickie Betts also plays lead guitar, Barry plays bass, are really locked in, and Barry doesn't want to leave Dickie. So Duane moves back to Jacksonville, lives at 2844 Riverside. It's in the book. I got a picture of it. Moves in with them, and they have a jam that features Duane, Barry on bass, Duane on guitar, Dickie on guitar, Jaimoe on drums, Butch Trucks on drums, and the first one is actually Reese Winans, keyboardist, who ends up playing with Stevie Ray Vaughan for a long time. And then 3 days later, according to lore, Greg comes back and completes the lineup March 26, 69. Jaimoe's a jazz man with a rhythm and blues background. Barry Oakley is a psychedelic lead bassist who started out playing Chicago blues as a guitar player before he moved to bass. Moved south with Tommy Rowe, who calls himself rockabilly, but I kind of call him bubblegum pop. But he moved south to play in Tommy Rowe's band. Dickie Betts has been playing in roadhouses and on the road since he was a teenager. And it loves country music and western swing. That was his big thing. Loves harmonies. Butch Trucks was in a folk rock band, but also loved classical music. Duane and Greg were the rhythm and bluesers and the more urban blues guys. It's a really wonderful mix of talent and abilities, and they were all really young. I think Dickie was like the oldest at 25, so they were very open to experiences. They were also supplementing heavily with substances to maybe get their minds right to the kind of things they were doing. But Duane, it's rare in that era to have two killer lead guitar players in the same band. You have one or two drummers. You have one good drummer, you're lucky enough to find one, much less two. So for Duane to have this big ensemble band, his talent then, sort of like how Derek Trucks does in Tedeschi Trucks, his talent becomes, it's way more than one of six when he stands out, but for the most part, he's one of six of the guys in the band. And you feel and hear that togetherness on their albums. You can hear it on their live shows too, at least I have.
So that layer of sound these guys produced is exceptional in its time frame. You would say that?
Yes.
That this is sort of the coming together of this exceptional musicians in an exceptional venue in the Fillmore East to produce an exceptional album. How much, though, does the time frame, 1971, what does that mean to this?
That's a very good question, and I forgot one thing on influences, jazz. And Jaimoe brought jazz influence to the Allman Brothers Band.
Right.
They play rock music like jazz, they do not play jazz. They're not jazzers. Back to the question, timing. I think, we know everything in history is really contingent on timing, and one left or one right, who knows what ends up happening. Bill Graham closed the Fillmore East within 3 months of recording this album. Yeah. So there's a big one there. Duane was dead, 9 months later, 7 months later.
October.
He was dead by the end of the year. The band also, some people hear this, I don't hear it as much, but the shows after that, they got arrested a week later in Jackson, Alabama, a week after recording Fillmore, with more drugs than you could shake a stick at. And it was the list of things. It was, PCP and mushrooms and LSD and heroin and cocaine a week after recording Fillmore East. They had problems with drugs that whole summer, bad problems. And Duane and Barry actually went to rehab. A whole bunch of them detoxed off of heroin. Heroin had really gotten to be a problem. So to say, and this might be a little curveball for you, but I would say, had they waited much longer, there's a chance they might not have captured it as well as they did, considering how hard they had been going at that point.
Right. It's, I think that's a really great way to sum up. It's an exceptional event in an exceptional time.
Yeah.
There's two bands that produce really great albums from Fillmore East at roughly the same time. The Allman Brothers is well known, greatly lauded. The other one, it takes 40 years for it to appear, and it's by Sly and the Family Stone. Is the reason those albums are particularly brilliant is that they were both multiracial bands?
Is it a reason?
Yeah.
Absolutely. And one of the things Jaimoe said to me, and I'm going to name drop real quick. Jaimoe is the drummer. He sits stage right, African American, from Mississippi. He told me when we met, he said, the thing I got right in the book was expressing how close to the source the Allman Brothers got. They weren't copying black musicians. It was very inherent in how they played, and it came across in the music. And Jaimoe had been saying that for years. And I was able to highlight it in such a way, frankly, that he found it in the book, which I'm really extremely pleased with. I think, it's easy to overlook the fact that they were integrated in the area, in the timing, in the area that they were. But they were traveling as hippies with a black man in 1969, 70, 71, 72. It wasn't easy. And I get people on Facebook trying to argue with me. Well, I had long hair in Georgia. Nobody gave me a hard time. I'm like, are you freaking kidding me? I mean, okay.
That's a good one.
Yeah, exactly. So I do think so. Yes, I think the bands that carried that, and all American music comes from a black source. It all goes back to that root. Really jazz and then outward, which all starts at the blues, and that's what the Allman Brothers are. It's Southern music. And so I love your trick question, and yes, I think that multicultural bands, I'll say Tedeschi Trucks, name dropped twice, I know you got the shirt on, half that band is not white. And I think that comes through in the music. Different cultures are interacting on stage. And of course, they got a drummer now from New Orleans, Isaac Eady, and if all American music comes from New Orleans, so you get a New Orleans cat in any band, you're in a special place.
Well, last question. What's been the reaction to your book outside of Murfreesboro, Tennessee? You're on friendly ground here. What's been the reaction both from music experts, from musicians themselves, and people associated with the band?
Yeah, it's been almost overwhelming. And I don't mean that in a bad way. I poured my soul out into this thing, and it's hard to put yourself out in the world like that, I have to say. I'm tiny bit was maybe less prepared for that than I thought I was going into it. It's been a tough couple years, right? I've had two just this week, one on Facebook and one through email. 2 women, actually, which is, really great. This is my favorite book on the Allman Brothers. I've read them all. And then they go on to list the other books, so I know they're for real because I've read them all too. I know where my book fits in this niche. I'm pleased with it, and for y'all's benefit, I'm not just saying it because he's here. This was not going to happen if Van hadn't taken me on and shepherded me through this process. And I genuinely did not ever think I was going to get this done when I wrote that goal down. So there's something for writing goals and chipping away at stuff. I don't recommend a midlife crisis when you lose your parents, but it was not my choice. I didn't choose that. But it's fulfilling to be on this side of it for sure.
Well, Bob, thank you.
Thank you, Van.
Thank you very much.
Appreciate it.